Hey, what's up, guys? Today, I'll show you a zombie horror film named Return of the Living Dead, Part 4 and 5. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. 10 years later, after the occurrence of the trioxide leak incident, everyone had forgotten about the trioxide gas. The head of Hybridtech, Charles, accidentally discovered that 6 barrels of trioxide remained undestroyed at an abandoned military base overseas. These were intentionally left behind at the time. Upon learning this information, Charles rushed abroad to buy them from the person in charge and bring them back for experimentation. Unexpectedly, due to the passage of time, one of the barrels had leaked, infecting one of the men with the virus and killing the person in charge on the spot. Charles pulled out his gun, killed them without mercy, and then brought several barrels of trioxide back to the United States for experiment. The scene shifts to a high school student named Julian who loves off-road motorcycling. Both his parents had died in a car accident, leaving him and his younger brother to rely on each other. They were raised by their uncle Charles, who was also the head of Hybridtech. One day, Julian and his classmates went to a stunt field to practice their bike skills. Unexpectedly, his friend Zeke had an accident while attempting to jump over an obstacle, causing him to flip his bike and fall into a coma from a severe head injury. Everyone rushed him to the hospital for treatment. Meanwhile, Charles's Living Dead experiment had made significant progress. The main component of the trioxide was a gene revival catalyst, which could reanimate corpses into the living dead. However, the reanimated corpses would become bloodthirsty, biting anyone they saw. Charles's mission was to find a way to control the living dead and turn them into biochemical soldiers for the battlefield. Little did he know that during the experimentation process, the trioxide leaked out through the pipelines and infected 2 employees working in the underground tunnel, turning them into the living dead. On the other side, Julian went to the hospital to visit Zeke, only to be informed by the hospital that Zeke had died upon arrival. Heartbroken by the news, Julian received a call from his classmate Katie, who worked as a security guard at Hybridtech. She claimed that she had just seen Zeke being brought into the company. Suspicious of the situation, Julian gathered his friends to investigate. After their hacker friend infiltrated the company's internal website, they indeed found Zeke's name listed, stating he had been taken to a laboratory. Since the company owned the hospital's ambulance, they could easily steal patients. At this point, the group began to suspect that Hybridtech might be conducting horrifying human experiments. After some discussion, the group decided to sneak in and rescue Zeke. With Katie's help, they obtained fake access cards, and their friend provided them with the building's blueprint. They decided to sneak in through the underground tunnel. Once everything was ready, they set off on their Tesla motorcycles that night. Unexpectedly, they encountered the 2 mutated employees halfway there. However, the group did not know what had happened to them. Their hairy companion named Harry pulled out his gun and warned the 2 not to approach, but to no avail. In a moment of crisis, Harry fired 2 shots at them, but they continued to advance towards Julian and the others, screaming about wanting to eat brains. The group was terrified and only then realized that the 2 employees had become living dead. In desperation, Harry fired another shot at one of the living dead's head, finally knocking them down. Harry then killed the other living dead and continued towards Hybridtech Company. Meanwhile, Katie was closely monitoring the company's movements from the surveillance. Soon, Julian's voice came through the walkie-talkie, saying they had reached the back door. Under Katie's guidance, they headed to the lab. The group passed through a dark tunnel, and from the lab below, they could hear eerie wails that frightened them. Still, they pressed on to save their friend. To their surprise, they encountered Julian's brother along the way. It turned out that the brother had eavesdropped on Julian's plan out of curiosity and followed them. With no other choice, Julian took his brother along. Before long, they reached the end of the tunnel and found a weapon storage instead of the lab. It was clear that Katie's directions were off. Worse still, the signal was blocked in this area, so Julian and Katie lost contact. As the group was at a loss for what to do, Charles suddenly appeared. Julian and the others realized they had entered Hybridtech's first-level laboratory. Harry pulled out his gun and threatened Charles to hand over Zeke. Julian intervened, telling Harry to put down the gun, and then tried to persuade his uncle that they only wanted to take their friend and leave. Seeing this, Charles reluctantly led the group to find Zeke. Along the way, they passed numerous rooms holding the living dead and felt shocked by that. Finally, in a cell, they found an awakened Zeke. Charles did not have the unlock code, so Harry simply shot the lock, freeing Zeke. The gunshot triggered the alarm system, and Katie in the monitoring room noticed this, trying to enter the password to shut off the alarm. On the other hand, as Julian and the others were leaving, they accidentally stumbled upon a nursery filled with zombie fetuses. This confirmed that Hybrid was indeed conducting terrifying experiments. At this point, Harry forced Charles to reveal the truth at gunpoint. It turned out that Hybrid had been helping the military develop biochemical soldiers using trioxide, which required them to source corpses from nearby hospitals for their resurrection experiments. Charles then revealed that after Julian's parents' death, they were also turned into biochemical soldiers and kept in the adjacent weapons department. While they were talking, the zombies in the Petri dishes suddenly became agitated, grabbing everyone's attention. Charles seized the opportunity to escape the lab quickly. Meanwhile, Katie accidentally pressed the wrong button while trying to disable the alarm, opening the cells holding the living dead. All the zombies rushed out, attacking the living. Julian and his companions were also attacked and had to make their way to the elevator to escape. During this process, the injured Zeke was bitten by one of the living dead. Subsequently, the group took the elevator back to the room they had been in earlier. After arming themselves, they planned to return the way they had come through the tunnel. Unexpectedly, the living dead broke the tunnel halfway through, separating the group. Zeke, Julian's brother, and a schoolgirl ran to the parking lot to find a car, while Julian and the other two were trapped in the lab. Julian wanted to check on his parents, so the three of them fought their way through the lab with guns, reaching the weapons department hall. They faced the living dead blocking their path, and quickly ended the battle with a burst of gunfire. However, while running towards the elevator, Harry was killed by a suddenly appearing zombie. The remaining two, without time to grieve, took the elevator upstairs. They successfully found Julian's parents, but they had already been turned into biochemical soldiers. Since a password was needed to awaken them, Julian had no choice but to leave with his friend. Soon after they left, Charles appeared in the lab, releasing Julian's parents. By the time Julian and his friend barely managed to escape outside, they were surrounded by the living dead. At the critical moment, Katie arrived in a car and rescued the two. Meanwhile, during Julian's brother's escape in the car, Zeke began to mutate and tried to eat the schoolgirl. In a panic, the car crashed into the roadside and exploded, knocking all three passengers unconscious. When they woke up, Julian's brother had already been killed by Zeke, who had eaten his brain. Schoolgirl quickly picked up a flamethrower and chased Zeke away. However, more living dead soon surrounded her. Luckily, Katie arrived in her car to save Schoolgirl. But as they were preparing to escape through the company's front gate, Julian's zombified father blocked their way. Holding a Gatling gun, he wrecked their car. Schoolgirl got out of the car, threw a grenade at him, and blew him to meet the zombie lord. The group continued their escape, only to encounter a scorched Zeke and the resurrected mother of Julian. A battle ensued between the two sides. Julian grappled with Zeke, while the others dealt with the biochemical soldiers. Zeke, now living dead, had become much more powerful and beat Julian badly. Seeing that he was no match for Zeke, Julian seized an opportunity to place a grenade on Zeke's body. As the explosion sounded, Zeke met his end. Schoolgirl led Julian's zombified mother to a nearby power distribution box and used the high-voltage electricity to end the battle. In the end, agents from the National Security Agency arrived to clean up the scene. Julian and his companions were fortunate to survive the disaster. However, Charles, the person in charge of Hybrid, secretly smuggled several barrels of trioxide out of the company building. That night, he brought a barrel of trioxide to a villa in the suburbs, intending to sell it to a foreign gang leader. The buyer insisted on seeing whether the trioxide could truly resurrect the dead. Reluctantly, Charles conducted an experiment using several corpses. However, an accident occurred during the process, and Charles was bitten by a living dead. The gang members shot the living dead and quickly fled away like scared chickens. The scene shifts, and a long time has passed since the living dead outbreak at Hybrid. Julian, who had escaped from the ordeal, has since forgotten about the incident. Back at school, he found his sexy girlfriend named Jenny, and the two were extremely happy together. One day, Julian received the tragic news that his uncle Charles had been murdered, and he was devastated. That afternoon, he and Jenny went to his uncle's house to sort through his belongings, only to discover a hidden compartment in the attic containing 2 barrels of trioxide. Neither of them knew what was inside the barrels, but they noticed the words "military supplies" engraved on the surface. Curious, they decided to transport one of the barrels to a lab to have their classmate, Cody, examine it. That evening, Julian found Cody at a party where he was working on a new type of hallucinogen to sell. When Cody learned about Julian's request, he immediately donned a lab coat and went to the lab. After a series of tests, he found that the liquid in the barrel had a composition similar to the stimulant he had been working on, but he couldn't identify it specifically. Upon hearing that it was a stimulant, their friend Jeremy became excited and, despite everyone's objections, tasted a bit of the liquid. Soon after, Jeremy began to act wildly and uncontrollably, which frightened everyone. Fortunately, he returned to normal shortly after and excitedly described the explosive euphoria he had experienced. Fearing trouble, Julian and Jenny considered calling the police, but after listening to Jeremy's account, Cody had other ideas. He wanted to use the liquid in the barrel to create stimulants to sell for profit. As it turned out, Jeremy shared the same idea. So Cody lied about needing to conduct further tests, successfully getting rid of Julian. Then, he and Jeremy began working diligently to create the stimulants. Meanwhile, the gangsters, John and his fellow, who had initially fled, received orders from their boss to retrieve the trioxide at all costs. So they disguised themselves as Interpol agents and went to Charles's house to search for any remaining barrels. That night, they secretly entered the house and found a barrel of trioxide in the attic, but traces on the floor suggested there should be another one. Determined to recover all the barrels, John began searching the surrounding area. At the same time, Jeremy and his friends had already started selling the stimulants they had made on campus. Business was booming and their supply quickly sold out. When Julian found out, he and Jenny went to the lab and had a big argument with Cody, pushing the barrel out in the process. Jenny then suggested they take the barrel to her lab to personally test it for toxicity. Julian agreed, and Jenny went to the lab to extract the liquid from the barrel and inject it into a lab rat's food, waiting to see the effects. Meanwhile, chaos erupted on campus. 3 reckless youths who had bought the stimulants went home, and 2 of them swallowed 3 pills each to enhance the effects. This immediately triggered a mutation, turning them into living dead who tried to eat their friend's brain. Terrified, the friend ran away, with the living dead in hot pursuit. Along the way, he encountered a girl who was out on a date and urged her to run. Unfortunately, she was completely baffled by the situation. Just then, her boyfriend arrived in his car, and she hurriedly got in. In the split second before the door closed, one of the living dead scratched her back. Assuming the 2 living dead were merely drug addicts, she didn't pay much attention and told her boyfriend to drive away quickly. Meanwhile, the guy ran into the school's band while they were rehearsing. He explained the situation to them, but no one believed him. Just as they were talking, the living dead caught up with them and killed the guitarist. At that point, the drummer believed his story and used his drumsticks to stab one of the zombies in the head, killing him. The guy picked up the guitar and took out the other one. The immediate danger was averted, but the infected girl mutated while arguing with her boyfriend and bit him, turning them both into living dead. The next day, the killings at the school caught the attention of John and his fellow. Upon discovering that the victims were all living dead, they launched an investigation at the school and eventually found Julian, Charles's nephew. Julian realized what they were looking for, but didn't dare tell the truth, claiming he didn't know anything. However, his odd behavior still aroused suspicion, and John and his men began to secretly tail him. On the other hand, Jenny and the lab assistant went to the lab to check on the situation, only to find that the lab rat had become extremely aggressive. The assistant tried to calm it down, but was bitten. Jenny thought the rat was just excited and didn't pay much attention, leaving the lab to get something. Curious about the barrel's contents, he tried to enter the password to unlock it. However, his bitten hand began to swell and secrete pus. Alarmed, the assistant rushed out to find a doctor. Just as he left, the barrel's lock mysteriously opened and the living dead inside crawled out, setting off a silent crisis. Jenny quickly returned to the lab, only to see the open barrel. She called Julian to inform him, but he was busy setting up a party with Cody and couldn't deal with the barrel issue. At that moment, the infected girl and her boyfriend arrived, biting anyone they saw. Believing the 2 had gone mad, the group tied them up and sent 2 male students to take them to the hospital. However, on the way, the living dead broke free and bit both students. Fortunately, John and his fellow had been following them and used a rocket launcher to blow up the car, sending them straight to meet Jesus. Realizing that the trioxide must be hidden in the school, they hurried back. On the other hand, the assistant had also mutated into a living dead, attacking the living in a frenzy. The infection spread rapidly, and soon the entire campus was overrun with the zombies. Realizing the severity of the situation, Julian and Cody rushed to the lab to meet up with Julia. On their way, they were attacked by 3 living dead and managed to kill them after a fierce struggle. Just as they were about to flee, the living dead from the barrel appeared, yelling about eating brains. At that critical moment, John and his men arrived and shot the living dead. John then went to the lab to take the barrel away and informed the others of the dangers of the trioxide. It was only then that Cody realized the trouble he had caused. He suddenly remembered that he had given some of the stimulants to Jeremy, who planned to sell them at the party that night. Upon hearing this, John drove them to the party, not to save people, but to retrieve the stimulants. Upon arriving at the scene, John took several guns from the trunk and handed them to Julian and the others for self-defense. They then entered the party to search for Jeremy, only to find that 1/3 of the people there had already turned into living dead, including Jeremy himself. Panicked partygoers tried to flee in the chaos, and Cody got separated from the group, accidentally getting bitten by a living dead. As he was about to mutate, John nearby saw the situation and stepped in, killing Cody. With the increasing number of the zombies, the situation was getting out of control. John and his fellow decided to retreat, but found themselves trapped due to the overwhelming number of living dead. In the end, they had to call the military for help. Meanwhile, Jenny and Julian encountered Jeremy while fleeing. Julian tried to shoot, but he had run out of bullets during the earlier fight. With no other choice, he engaged in bare muscle wrestling with the mutated Jeremy, who had become incredibly strong. Julian was no match for him and was soon pinned down. In the nick of time, Jenny pulled out a handgun and shot Jeremy, killing him. The two then continued their escape. Not long after, a military helicopter flew in from a distance. They didn't care whether the people below were alive or dead and began firing indiscriminately. This was followed by the launch of several missiles, turning the scene into ruins. In the end, Julian, Jenny, and John managed to hide in a house and escape the carnage. When they emerged, they saw that the party scene was a complete mess, with not a single survivor left. This Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.